Oh my gosh, you guys. Is it is it the loin stream? We actually read books here? Grumble! I know it's been such a long time, but yeah, we actually do still read books here. It's just it's it's been a time. And Sam! I love you always come in with that little face. Okay, I don't know anything about this book that has been chosen for us. That's your face right now. I always think of pens because the first time I shared that, because it was like a cat jumping to get something and like smacking at the other cat in the face with its paw when it jumped. And that was the cat's face. And then Monty was like, that's so tense. That's so Tennessee. And that's why it's called Tense Cat. Anyway, I don't know anything about this book. I don't think it has too many reviews on it either. It does have multiple covers. That's pretty much it. So we're going to discover this one together. Grumble discovered that what this author said one of his inspirations is Piers Anthony, who I think did a bunch of sussy sword and sorcery books, sword and sussery books, more like it. So we're going to see how it goes. Chapter 1. Torrance fell to his knees in the snow, vomiting onto a spill of his own blood. One arm wrapped across his midsection, the other was on the pommel of his massive two-handed blade. He supported his weight with his hand on his weapon, stopping himself from falling face first into the muck and muss between his legs. Covered in gore, chunks of flesh and sinew decorated the blade, and a third of the sword lay embedded in the icy loam of the ground. Around the weapon lay a half dozen bodies of gnarled men with hyena-like heads. The bodies were hacked and torn, heads crushed and limbs twisted. More bloody weapons laid around them, broken, rusted, and chipped. "That'll give you tetanus," Terence said to no one. "I wouldn't want to get cut up by one of those." But one of those had cut him. His mind deposited the information into his thoughts, like suddenly remembering where he'd put his keys or that he'd had a doctor's appointment on Tuesday, which he didn't. He'd been driving home from one when he hit a patch of ice. That's right. Torrance spoke again, his white fur cloak whipping around him and wind picking up the frozen shelf of the mountainside. "I was driving home." Torrance pushed to his feet, using his sword to leverage himself up. Without thinking about it, he bent and wiped the blade along the still warm corpses of the creatures, goal his memory supplied, that he'd killed moments before. The bodies steamed in the air of a frozen north, and Torrance looked out across the countryside. He was in the easternmost portion of Reese Steppe, on the western edge of the frozen desert. Looking to the south, he could see the Black Wood, a haunted forest contaminated by mages and wizards and sorcerers who'd once occupied the 9 towers of magic on its eastern border. "What the hell does that mean?" Torrance asked, his memories gently blanketing him from the information. Let's just hope the author doesn't like those parts. Let's hope. It was like remembering a birthday party from your childhood that you didn't even know you'd forgotten. You knew it to be true, but it was just hadn't been in your head at all before it was in your head. It wasn't a lost memory that makes your grasp it wasn't a lost memory that makes you grasp when it showed up again. It was one of those that made you throw up your hands and exclaim, "Oh yeah," as you smiled. The view in front of him, as well as the scene of carnage at his feet, conflicted with the last memory that he'd had of what he'd been doing before 30 seconds ago. His arm was still across his midsection, covering the viscous wound where a knoll had almost disemboweled him. A dozen of the creatures had been on the attack. They'd dropped stones from the above as he trudged through the knee-deep snow. The rocks had fallen around him, and he'd reacted out of instinct, bounding one way and bouncing another to avoid being hit by the makeshift avalanche. He remembered thinking that it was a Pemtai idea. Pemtai. The word broke his train of thought. He knew it through his body, not his own mind, as stupid or ignorant, and that their quarry, which was him, had a chance of being knocked off the side of the mountain and plummeting far below into the valley below. Far down into the valley below, thus removing the chance for his attackers to loot or eat their target. Then they'd attacked, swarming from a hiding place as a half a dozen with swords or wicked twisted daggers. They charged him, one being taken out by the final melon-sized stone thrown from above. The creature had fallen, issuing a brief scream that ended when its head was crushed at the first contact with the mountainside and then plummeted into the mists below. Torrance had thought nothing else of that one, because it was so far down that even the sound of the body crunching as it hit the ground was lost in the fall's distance. The others had come towards him, jabbing with their blades but keeping a distance between them and him. He figured out a way as soon as the arrows began coming down from above. He charged the closest attacker, which his current thoughts wanted to call monster, and used it as a shield. The creature had taken 3 arrows to the chest before it went limp and lifeless. Torrance had discarded it over the side of the mountain. As the scene replayed in Torrance's head, he struggled with it because he also had a very difficult set of experiences in his recent memory. He had gone to the doctor's, driving himself using a newly installed hand control in a minivan. It had been nerve-wracking, and his thoughts had kept going back to that fateful day when he had lost his ability to stand and walk, his father, and so much all in one car accident. An accident that people told him was no one's fault, just a patch of ice, that he shouldn't feel guilty about what had happened. These things happened, they said. The chuz, they did. There was another word that had changed. Chuz, when he had meant chuz. No, not chuz, chuz. His brain kept translating the loose meaning of this swear word to what his body knew. His thoughts went back to where they'd been, the difference between the two words fading like light breeze, unnoticed. Torrance had been 16 and a junior in high school. He was doing all well in track and field, football and soccer, as well as being the favorite of many girls. He had only had his real license, as opposed to his learner's permit, for 3 months when this happened. A patch of ice, loss of control, a tumbling sensation that included a sharp snapping sound from behind him, and he never heard his father's voice again after all those last shouts of panic. He also had never walked again. That meant no more sports, no more girls, no more success, no more friends. He had been broken inside and out, completely destroyed. We're going in on this hard. Also, how all the girls just disappeared when he couldn't do sports anymore. I guess they were only there because of how he handled balls. He'd finished school mostly at home through new online courses that were offered in extenuating circumstances. But today he fought those memories. He'd turned the app on his phone up, blasting music into the small minivan donated and converted for his use. He sang along, driving and gripping the steering wheel in a white-knuckled grip, and made it safely to his physical therapy appointment. Though he'd never walk and would be restricted to a wheelchair for the rest of his life, the doctor had assured him that he was doing well. It was a 45-minute drive, a 30-minute wait, all for 4 minutes with the nurse checking his vitals, and then 3 minutes with the doctor that barely looked up from his notes. The memory jumped, blending with his anger and bitterness that for what he was given, what was done to him, shunted the thoughts away. He focused on the now, on the present, as he was taught to do when talking to his therapist. The world lurched. It wasn't his world. He was on the mountainside, high above a forest in one direction and plains in another. This wasn't right. I'm mildly confused as to the setting because he's got a sword and there's mystical creatures, but he's also got a minivan, but he's also unable to use his legs, but he's got his minivan tricked out to work with a joystick so he doesn't need his legs. Where was his car? He had hit the ice. And then he was there. He stared into the distance, his mind going blank, becoming overwhelmed. The treetops of the forest to the south were still mostly green and just beginning to get gold and orange and rust highlights as autumn set in. The snows in the mountains were descending, and in a month or two it would cover the lands. Torrance's body took over. He looked down, moving his arms from the wounds he'd received a few minutes ago that ran across his abdomen. It was bright pink puckered scar now, like he'd visited a healer that wasn't an elder or adept, but instead he was just an acolyte that did his best. He shrugged and smiled. At least he wasn't dead. He lifted his sword and checked to make sure that it was clean, swung it overhead with his right hand, caught the tip with his left, and guided it into the leather scabbard on his back. I'm trying to imagine this. Flicking the sword with the right, catching it in the left, and tucking it into your back. That doesn't feel super efficient. Looking down, he knelt beside the dead creatures and began scavenging where whatever he thought would be useful. Rummaging through the knoll's pouches, he pulled various items out, looked at them, and either tucked them into his own pouches or his knapsack or tossed them onto the side. He stowed a piece of charcoal, a silver thimble, a bone carving of a bear, and a few other items. Most things were discarded, including stale chunks of bread and crumbly moldy cheese, rust-pocked knives, and various and sundry odds and ends. The few coins, silver pecks, and copper flecks were kept. He held one deep gemstone up to the setting sun before dropping into the same pouch as his coins. The waning day made him pause. He had yet he had to move. He'd been seeking shelter and keeping an eye out for a game that he could use for a meal when he was attacked. He'd hoped to make the foothills of the mountains before it got too late. He'd seen the glint of sunlight off of the stream and had been heading for that, knowing the local fauna would come to it to drink. Reaching over to a cooling form of a knoll, he jerked the primitive bow from its massive paw and wrangled the quiver with a dozen and a half rough arrows in it from the creature's back. Standing, Torrance moved forward, loping down the path in long strides, letting gravity help him along so he didn't have to put it in as much effort. He quickly descended. He knew that he wouldn't reach the bottom before dark, but maybe he could get lucky and hunt on the run. Torrance's mind picked him up, but cautiously and delicately, not wanting to interrupt the automatic actions of what seemed to be his body now. He raised his hands and looked at them, still leaping from the path to the side of the hillock to the raised knoll bounding downward towards his destination in the distance, and saw that they were different from his normal mocha-colored skin. These were a brown, but with a tinge of red mixed in. Torrance could feel his long silky hair bouncing in its braid on his shoulder instead of on its usual tight knit curls. He was taller than before and wider, and the weight of it felt different. He thought about it for a moment, and suddenly he was in full control of his body. His feet stumbled under the unfamiliar balance of muscles and height, and he tripped. He went down hard, turning to one side, landing on his shoulder, and sliding 2 meters in the rain and gravel and sand. Mentally, Torrance pulled his non-existent hands from his controls. The body stood without his help, and he heard a deep throaty laugh come from it. The head dipped down, the hands sweeping across taut muscles, looking for injury. The knapsack shifted on his back, atop the cloak and sword, and his belt showed his two pouches still attached. The heavy gray woolen shirt had torn, but the woolen pants and leather boots were still in reasonable condition. Is he so blasé? I'm like, is he playing a video game? How do we go from like car accident, doctor, modern day with stuff to like magical thing, and he seems to be running around now. That's what I'm wondering because he's got legs now and hasn't explained it, so I don't know. Hopefully we'll find out. He moved forward again, with that easy mountain goat gait and assuredly agility that came without thought. Terence realized he was in a body. Now that seemed like an obvious conclusion, but it was more than that. He was in a different body, a body that had an instinctual set of skills. This body took over when he wasn't specifically trying to do anything, and simple idea of what he wanted to accomplish was suggested rather than pushed or forced. You okay, Tatum? Chillax. Chill yourself. He wasn't himself in a very literal way. He was someone else, someone who was huge, muscled, and fit. Maybe this was his body, what his body would have been like if he hadn't been in that car accident. Torrance searched for his mind. Any thought that wasn't his own. He found nothing. Where was he? Northern Turon, memories answered. East of the wandering hills and mountains, south of Steppes, west of the frozen desert, and north of the black woods. Torrance fainted in his new head, but his body kept going. I know he got up and started moving, which, fair. When I see him on all four legs, I'm like, good, this is what I want to see. Do you want a little do you want a little chew? But he was sleeping soundly like 10 minutes ago. Then he just decided he didn't want to lay down anymore. You're caught on that cord. There you go. Vanya! I feel like it's been a while. Bing bong. Bing bong, bing bong. See, so it's either VR slash some kind of isekai, or he got into a car accident and his mind ejected out of his body and landed in a different body. Not even questioning it. No, and I don't even know like if there's because it talked about the Black Forest being filled with wizards, sorcerers, it's some other magical type. So magic is part of this, but they also have football. Seemingly regular high school. So I don't know what the norm is technically. The kid picked himself up from the dust of the alley and spun to face his pursuers. His legs should have been broken from the from the 4-story jump he'd made, and he knew that he'd blacked out at least for a moment. He was a new man though, and only seconds had passed since he jumped. It was like a dream as this new consciousness settled over him, like a new skin over his 17-year-old frame. The bones of his calves knit back together, a surge of otherworldly energies filling his body, with a rush of mixed emotions, from disbelief to wonder, bitterness to hope, and acceptance of the inevitable, of the elderly to the endless possibilities of youth. The kid rose up and smiled. He and she didn't have to die today. This was the delight of a dream that doesn't feel like a dream, but instead is real. It was a moment most people always vaguely wish for, but never really expect to happen. It was that hope of winning the lottery, getting your dream promotion handed to you, or that other person saying yes to the life and future by your side. But it was but it was encapsulated by the kid standing up in the alley. 15 deadly assassins were after him, rappelling down the sides of the building on the thin silk cords of their professions, or just dropping down from the windowsill to windowsill until they reached the ground. But it didn't matter anymore. The kid smiled and let out a whoop that even a blind adversary could track him with. Tally ho! The game is afoot, Watson! He shouted. The kid ran, joy in every stride, and the thrill of being alive in every action. Laughter, delight, and pure unadulterated happiness flooded through everything the kid did. Run, run, run as fast as you can, the kid shouted. You'll never catch me. I'm the gingerbread man. I ran from the baker and his wife, too. You'll never catch me, not any of you. He laughed, turning the corner into the main marketplace, and Durgan's keep, skidding around the fruit cart and into the flow of foot traffic of the evening shopping crowd. 15 men and women poured into the street after the kid. They barreled into the merchants and knocked over shoppers, knives gleaming as they ran after the lithe youth. People dove out of the way, and shrill whistles of the city watch rose in the distance. The kid reached the city square, a 3 meter across wall on a raised dais in the center, and turned to face his foes. Twin daggers appeared in his hands without him even thinking about it. The assassins ran into the area, spreading out to the cover of an escape the kid may consider. The primary streets, set as a compass points, had two people in front of each of them, and the alleys at the secondary compass points had one each. This is another fine mess I've gotten myself into, Stanley, the kid said, laughing, and let his twin blades fly. One assassin stumbled backwards, clutching at his bloody throat. Another fell forward, a blade protruding from his chest. The kid laughed again, and leapt from the well into a thin crowd towards his fallen foes. Smiling into their fading eyes, the kid snatched his and their weapons up, crouching and slicing their money pouches free and dropping them into his own. The city watched. The city watch pushed into the building. The city watch pushed into the building made valley, cutting their way through the assassins at the edge of the square, allowing the responsible citizens a getaway route. A dozen guards replaced the assassins. The remaining score of people that weren't involved escaped through the openings made by the patrol, and the guards, stout, tall, and broad shouldered, formed human barriers between the kid and the ways out. The kid remembered tales not from his own memory, but from the memories of the bodies that he now inhabited. Tales of the days before the talisman, the comet that had dominated the sky for so long, rained down its mystical emanations, and increasing the power of the necromancers and summoners everywhere. And when Durgan's Keep wasn't a refuge for people attempting to get away from the demons to the southeast, or the constant trickling influx of undead from the west. Once upon a time, Durgan's Keep was home to the adventurers and merchants alike. Founded by an intrepid Rocairn Durgan, he laid out plans and sanctioned off the area of wilderness to create a balanced trade town that grew into a fortified capital of the eastern part of the continent. His Ifane and other companions each put in their thoughts about what their own race would like in a section of town, and after 20 years of construction, Durgan's Keep was born. The demon's invasion was almost 100 years ago, long before the talisman, as maniacal beings from other dimensions flooded out of the land's end to the southeast, was a herald of change. It had started a series of events that included the now infamous necromancer Rondarius the Foul escaping from his multiple century-long imprisonment. Then, when the talisman stopped in the sky and stayed hanging over the land for decades, everything went to shit. The kid hadn't been around for that, in either form. That thought made the person at the core of the kid pause and consider, but then the rush of the guards and assassins allowed the kid to stop thinking and throw himself into action. He ran forward and leapt into the air. His feet caught nothing, but he continued to rise. The guards beneath his boots bent suddenly, as if they had been trampled over, though the kid's boots were almost a meter above their heads. The kid flipped, spinning heels over head through the air and catching onto a walnut window sill of a third-story apartment. The surrounding architecture reminded the person inside the kid of the Tudor era of their own world. Dark wood boxing in and slashing across walls, beige plaster work was the dominant style. A fair amount of stonework balanced it, showing the craftsmanship of the Rocairn buildings of Durgan Keep. Pulling himself up, the kid saw a woman's face, with her mouth in a mow of surprise, staring out the window at him. With a wave of his hand, he drew on the energy of his mind and touched hers. Hocus pocus, baby. The kid let out a cat like yowl and changed. The woman now saw a cat struggling outside of her window, trying to pull itself up, and angry people below pointing at it with a raised crossbow ready with throwing blades. Is this D&D fanfic or something? There's so much happening yet. I don't know, man. And it sounds like he's possibly had if the kid is the same person as was in the previous torrents, then he may have more than one body of memories and we may be going through another person's memories. It's a little rough since I'm waiting for like something concrete since we haven't established anything concrete yet. Also, this is totally an aside. I meant to bring it up earlier, but as you've noticed, maybe hopefully, I did in fact fix stream avatars. So everybody gets to be here. Oh, that's so much lower than you're supposed to be. I need to I need to fix something. Like, oops. Oh my gosh, what happened there? I just messed it up. It just I just messed up that let's it does not like that. What happened? Okay, we'll fix that. Yeah, because before I messed it up, where it was just all black, and I was like, how do I fix this so it's not burying the screen? And then I did fix it. I'm also tired, Grumble. I have been fighting so much sleepiness that it is ridiculous. Hey, James. How's it going? I'm just fixing what I just broke and fixed again. There we go. I came to like okay. Get this out of here. We're supposed to be fixing this. I think. Boop, boop. Actually, I think you're allowed to be there because there's that. I think this needs to actually be higher because you're supposed to come in on my head. And I like changed the height. That's a teleport, so we gotta boop, boop. Okay. And probably do another ladder. Cryptable. I don't know. Collision. Tatum, what are you doing over there? You know this. You're right. I need to put a ladder back over here so you can get back into the teleporter. 1 second. Tatum has stuck himself. Why is there a woman on the cover? So far, it's been male characters, right? I also have questions. Maybe that's what he's going to inhabit next. Okay. BRB. Tate has made himself stuck. What are you doing? It's okay. It's okay. I caught it. I did not catch the stand. It's fine. I've got everything under control, I swear. We're good. Hey, Kingdom. Come here. that he's been saved. He gets himself stuck in not real situations too. He'll be like, help me, but nothing is actually wrong. Okay. That time, he got his foot wrapped in a cord. It was not stuck or anything, but he didn't want to pull it, so whatever. Whatever. Did you look? I think this is the newer cover. Did you see the older cover for this book? My child, you need to relax. It also has a woman on the cover, actually. I will show you. Mm. If only. Oh my gosh, Tatum, please. That's not what I want to do. Mm. Tatum, I need you to relax. There you go. That was the other cover. Yes, relax. Good job. Well, now you're not even seeing it because I clicked into the other thing. Ugh, you don't want double me. That's a mistake. The woman reached forward and shoved the window open before scrambling backwards to avoid the flurry of daggers that struck the window frame outside and the bolts that hit the ceiling within. She saw the cat leap inside, yowling as the kid ran past her, shouting a thank you to the woman. He ran through the sitting room, threw open the door to the hall, and stopped to listen. Angry voices came up from below, and the sound of booted feet on the stairs echoed hollowly. The kid ran up the last flight of stairs. A square opening showed the sky outside of the stairwell. He clambered out to the window frame at the top of the stairs. His fingers grabbed unseen holds and he pulled himself up the outside of the building. Looking down into the alleyway 10 meters below, the kid saw a tall, thin assassin with carrot orange hair leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, watching him climb with a dull disinterest. It was Mezk, the Damned. Well known for his pact with demons, people whispered he'd agreed to let them have his soul when he died, but he would never die of violence or injury. How could I know this about someone that I've never met? The kid thought, and his grip on the wall slipped and he fell. He caught himself on the window he climbed out of and pulled himself upward, focusing on what he was doing, his heart pounding rather than random thoughts about what he should or shouldn't know. Once he gained once he gained the rooftop, he was on his way to escape. Using his magic, he pushed himself with his with each leap, allowing him to jump spaces 2 or 3 times wider than a normal thief could jump. With a nod and a wave, people forgot that he'd passed through their windows and just didn't see him at all. Life was grand, or at least it was until he had settled on top of the peaked roof of a church of Jonah. Sitting on his back with a warm chimney, his legs bent and his butt resting on the slate shingles of the stout building, the kid wondered about his death. Jonath's trident, he swore, using the phrase from memory of his body. He knew that he'd died. He'd fallen 4 stories off a roof, landed on his feet, and broke his legs. Falling backwards, he'd caved in the back of his head in the cobblestone alley. But here he was alive and well, and not the same as he was before. He also knew that his other body in a different world, laying in bed, dying of stage 4 cancer. He knew that he had all of his skills, all of his knowledge, and even his memories for the most part, but he also had more. He had a second set of skills, knowledge, and memories. These other memories were foreign, but at the same time felt more real than the roof on which he sat. They held decades of life, including a husband who'd left her, a son who'd died in a coma of liver failure because of alcohol poisoning when he was just a month from graduating college with a doctorate, and a plethora of skills ranging from cooking fried foods to knitting to how to write a resume in Microsoft Word. What? Why do these randoms keep dying but not dying? Why do they keep thinking about dying? I always think about I can write a resume in Microsoft Word when I'm dying. That is my last thought of thoughts. Hey, David! Woo woo! I just dropped a bunch of hearts in there. I'll also drop this guy. How's it going, David? Feels like it's been a while. We're just dying and thinking of Microsoft Word. Anyway, the kid remembered that he was once called Jen, but that was a world away, even a lifetime away. None of that mattered anymore. He was here, and he was loving life. No more, he thought, pushing the other memories to the side. He was the kid now and belonged here. This was his body now, and this was his world, and he would live life to the fullest this time. No more worrying about what right or proper, or what the boss thought of her dress. And if that man in the street wanted to hurt her for the couple of dollars in her purse, she would miss Cuddles, her Pomeranian, but the nurses would see to the dog. He would, the kid chided, himself. He would. He would no longer be she who was. Instead, he would be him. The strange thought swirled and bumped around the kid's head. With a chuckle and shrug, he brushed the thought aside. Standing up, he looked across the rooftops, watching twilight settle in. The low-hanging cloud of smoke from the wood fires, cooking dinner and warming houses in the late evening filled the sky just 30 meters above the city. He had been on the job, but it had been lost in translation. Que sera, sera, the kid chuckled again. Whatever will be, will be. The future's not ours, you see. And with a quick twirl, the kid straightened up and ran for the edge of the rooftop, threw himself off, grabbed the canvas awning below to pull himself off of it, bounced off it, and flipped to the street below. Why didn't he ever think of doing things like that before tonight, he wondered, as he sauntered up the street, happily whistling. It sounds like somebody took inspiration from Aladdin. Is I am getting from this scene is it is very reading like Aladdin. And thank you for being here in spirit. David. It's always good to have you in whatever form, corporeal or otherwise. Chapter 3. Esperanza staggered backwards, away from the crowd of strangers reaching for her adoringly. They were all taking they were all talking at once, some weeping, some screaming, and others just whispering, but all seemed grateful to her. The words miracle worker were being repeated over and over. The dark-haired woman tripped over the hem of her long robe, her hands flying as she fell backwards. She landed hard on her butt. Holding her hands out to the front of her, her sleeves sliding up to her arms and pooling in the crook of her elbows, she stared at the blotches of gray and brown fading from her skin, swollen and puffy flesh shrunk as she watched, veins receded to normal size, and kept capillaries healed as bruises disappeared under her gaze. A second set of impulses, almost thoughts, flooded her mind, pushing the fear and surprise aside. They told her of the power of Latris, the goddess of wind, weather, and wisdom, mother of the twin gods Tor and Tara, the wife of the god Justice of Earth and Earth Jonath. The thoughts told her of the favors of the goddess and how it had blessed her and would shelter and protect her, and how it had guided her in healing the hundreds of sick people in the village, saving them and their children from being wiped out by the plague. Esperanza shoved the thoughts away, pushed at that one other identity, and screamed, tearing at her own hair, pulling a fistful out with each hand. The crowd stopped. They stared at her uncertainly, not sure what to do. One middle-aged woman stepped forward, holding out the hand, and said something in the language that Esperanza thought she should comprehend. But it wasn't English or Spanish, and though she felt that she knew it, her mind blocked out any understanding because it was impossible. Oops. Oh my gosh, Vanya, what did you change your picture to? I'm sure it's been that picture longer than I'm noticing it, but I'm not used to seeing you with that picture. Oh my gosh, look how giant David is. Sorry, I'm just getting I'm just noticing things. The woman approached the other people. The woman approached like most people approached a scared and wounded animal, cautious, slowly, speaking gently, and making comforting noises between words. The woman came close enough to touch Esperanza and knelt as she took the younger woman's hand into her own. Esperanza fainted. Esperanza woke in a small room. She put her hand over her head and it bumped a wall before she could even extend her arm all the way. She could see the wall at the foot of the bed by the faint light from the dim fire in the ceramic chimney that stood beside the door to her left and barely more than an arm's length away. Smoke curled from the top of it, drawn out of the hole in a muddy wall. Directly across from the door was the only window in the room. Woven reeds of twisted branches created a shutter placed over the opening and then covered with a thicker blanket to keep the chill outside and the heat inside. Esperanza ran her fingers along the wall beside the bed on her right. Under her hands, she could feel fibrous plants mixed into the clay to help give the wall strength. The whole place smelled faintly of must and dung, the latter from the dried horse manure that burned in the chimney. Rolling onto one side of her burlap mattress filled with reeds, Esperanza saw her few possessions on the table of woven branches. It held the holy symbol of Latres, a gustling cloud with 7 stars around it. Subtle etchings seemed to show a face within the cloud. Beside it was a herb pouch on its thin leather belt, her neatly folded robe, a few hair combs, and a small mortar and pestle, and a small knife in a sheath. She picked up the blade and drew it from the holder. She stared at it. She had been ending her she had been ending her life, and now she was here. This knife held her eyes as it moved along her forearm and wrist, as if her own vo- as if of its own volition. It scratched her skin, leaving a white line in the flesh. Latress's breath protect us, she muttered, wondering at the words that she muttered. That wasn't her god, but it felt like it was the one watching over her right now. A rough curtain hung in the doorway, and the smell of something cooking drifted from the other room. A woman's voice sang a gentle lullaby, more humming than singing, and the sound of wooden bowls and utensils clunked against each other. The sounds stopped when Esperanza sat up, the bed creaking and rustling beneath her. Hello? The woman's voice said from the other side of the curtain. Esperanza could see a form through the opening between the wall and the hanging barrier. It looked up on the and to one side, giving her guest the courtesy of privacy. No, Esperanza muttered. Oh, you're awake. The woman pushed through the curtain and smiled down at her guest. Maybe you'd like to freshen up? The woman had the coarse clay pitcher and a large bowl in her hands and sat them in a small table beside the bed. She pulled a rough cloth tucked into her apron strings out and set it aside with the others. There's a chamber pot and scrapers under the table. The woman smiled down at her. And just come out here when you're done. Esperanza came out 10 minutes later looking traumatized. The room she stepped into wasn't much bigger than the bedroom and only had one door that presumably led to the outside. The woman looked up from her squatting position in front of the fireplace. She was stirring some sort of stew in a ceramic pot that sat directly on the hot coals of the fire. The rest of the room was plain. A table with two chairs sat on one side of the fire, and a low wooden bench covered with blankets was on the other side. Esperanza guessed that this served as a couch, but also as the woman's bed, while Esperanza was her guest. Directly across from the small knee-high hearth, which was a brick and mud affair, was what Esperanza guessed to be the kitchen. It wasn't more than a few shelves set into the mud walls with supplies neatly lining them. "Everything come out okay?" her hostess asked, smiling and showing a mouth with missing teeth, broken and brown. Esperanza just stared at her as if she hadn't understood a word coming out of her mouth. "Well," the woman said, "I'm guessing it did, otherwise you wouldn't be here. I'm Rose, by the way. I thought that you may have remembered it, but considering everything that you've gone through, it must have aidled you." Rose moved to get the wooden bowls from the kitchen area, and Esperanza looked at the woman. Rose was younger than Esperanza originally thought, at least 20 years younger, and probably in her mid-30s, which would make the woman less than 10 years older than her. Rose must have had a hard life and was slightly bent as to move out of the house. Her gray streaked hair in a tight bun on her head, held by a blue ribbon, and her knuckles swollen and red from hard work. The decor of the house was somewhere between simple and non-existent. Curtains of faded yellow hung over the one shuttered window, and a painted urn with a large chip from it stood at the table to hold drinking water. Wreaths and braids of dry herbs hung from the ceiling. Rose squatted next to the hearth to spoon out some stew into two shallow bowls. She stood, groaning, and brought the bowls to the table and sat them down. Taking two ceramic cups from the shelf, she set them on the table and filled the vessels with cloudy water from the painted urn. "Sorry, we don't have no beer." Rose smiled sheepishly, showing her broken teeth, "or any meat with all the animals dying. Hard to make these things when so many of the village were too sick to work or died from the plague. But that'll all change now that you've fixed things." Esperanza thought that the woman would be pretty if she wasn't raised in a third world country. Then she wondered how she'd gotten to this place, and why everyone spoke English here. But it wasn't English, nagged some logic in the back of her head. She could understand Rose and all of the other villages earlier, with no issue. But it wasn't any language that she knew, except her brain did know it, like a reflex. It just caught the words, and she knew the meaning with absolute clarity. Are you are you referring to the "she would be pretty if she wasn't raised in a third world country"? What a weird is the nicest way to say it. What a weird phrase. That was unnecessary and doesn't really make sense. "Come on, then." Rose waved at her, then gestured to the second chair. "You gotta eat, right? Even a priestess needs to eat, at least as far as I know." Esperanza moved to the chair, pulled it out, and sat. It was a high ladder-back wooden chair with a woven straw seat and surprisingly comfortable. Rose unwrapped a loaf of dark bread, tore a hunk from it, and sat it on the table in front of Esperanza's bowl. She repeated the process for herself before wrapping the bread back up and setting it aside. "Vanya, how was your day, BT Dubs?" The bowls were small, and a hunk of bread was about as large as your average dinner roll. Looking around, Esperanza realized that this was everything that they had to eat, and it was probably more than most villagers had on their own tables tonight. That was when Esperanza realized that she hadn't seen anyone who was overweight here. She'd seen people who were sickly thin, perhaps because of the illness that the village had suffered from, or because of the food shortage. Rose mentioned It couldn't have been or it could have been a combination of the two. Latris reigns. Latris's reign bless this food. The words came out unbidden by her conscious thoughts, and nourish us. Esperanza stopped looking at her hostess, who was looking. Yeah, stopped looking at her hostess, who was smiling, and then, oh my gosh, where did I go? And then looked back down. Esperanza picked up the wooden spoon, dipped it into the dark brown broth in the bowl, fished out a chunk of potato, and raised it to her mouth. Sniffing without realizing she was doing it, she smelled a pungent aroma of peat moss. That was the musty smell from earlier also, she realized. With the tip of her tongue, she tasted the stew that if she wanted to call it that. It was bland and thin, but made a faint meaty flavor of mushrooms. Rose was watching her expectantly, smiling supportively as she ate. When the woman saw Esperanza looking back at her, Rose raised her spoon in a toast and then slurped the broth from it. Esperanza looked at the woman's shallow bowl and saw that there was no potatoes in it. Esperanza remembered her grandmother, the woman who had raised her, the woman who had spoken Spanish but found a way to get a job and keep food on the table, clothes on Esperanza's back, and the water and power on. She was always made sure that Esperanza had a nice dress, new shoes, and a portion of dinner that had meat. When Esperanza questioned her grandmother why she'd never had any meat, her grandmother explained that it was too hard for her to chew and that she didn't want any. When Esperanza was older, years after her grandmother had died, she realized the truth. The woman had always made sure that her granddaughter had the best that she could give, even if it meant that her grandmother went without. Rose, sipping at the broth and watching Esperanza with her potato laden spoon, suddenly reminded Esperanza of her grandmother. Esperanza smiled, put the potato in her mouth with a wash of broth, chewed, made appreciative noises, and nodded at Rose. Within minutes, the two had finished the meal. Esperanza wanted a glass of water to rinse the dirt out of her teeth. The water from the urn was clouded with it, but she only showed appreciation. Rose chatted as she cleaned up, telling her guest about everything that she was doing, everything that she'd taught them, even boiling water before drinking it, washing things twice, and cleaning their hands before eating or sleeping. Considering the hanging herbs and things that Rose had said and the things Rose said about teaching the villagers specific things, Esperanza had concluded that Rose must be something like the village's wise woman, and the woman did seem to care about everyone else's well-being. Something thudded against the shutter from the outside, and the smell of smoldering flame rose. Through the cracks of the shutters and the front door, they could see the dancing orange light. Shouts began filling the night, and within seconds screams had followed. Rose rushed to the door and pulled it open. Over her shoulder, Esperanza could see the slow shambling forms of the walking dead. "Give us the damned witch!" a deep voice boomed, "or I promise each and every man, woman, and child in this village will join my rotting army." Rose looked back at Esperanza over her shoulder. "Bring out the priestess of Latress, or everyone dies!" The man's voice shouted louder and closer this time. "And then we will be brought back from the dead to serve for me eternally." She's a white savior. Maybe. I need to go look at the Goodreads for this really quick and try to figure out what the plot actually is. I know we're switching between three different characters right now, but I still. When you are poor, you become a criminal, and when you are a criminal, you are evil, and when you are evil, you are ugly. The logic is sound. Tatum, why do you keep doing that? I think you need to relax, sir. Brought together by design, held together by hope, shattered by magical apocalypse, the world of Atheria struggles to rise from the ashes of war and destruction. Esperanza, at odds with her faith, wakes up in a mystical world under attack by powerful necromancers. I didn't quite get that she woke up in a strange world. It just feels like she's in not where she's used to. Joined by Torrance and the kid, two people who aren't what they appear, they hunt the wielder of black magic and her undead horde. Finding one another was the first step to finding themselves, searching ancient arcane ruins and scouring the lands for help. They searched for a way to fight the overpowering evil. If they can't stop her, then all of civilization will be destroyed and the dead shall control the land. You'll love this book for characters that feel real and nonstop action. Get it now. Internationally recognized voice actor, bestseller. I don't know. I don't know about this. What is he voice acted? That's the question now. Author and podcaster. Author of 40 plus books. Excuse me. Okay, we only have two actor credits on here. I should be showing you guys this screen. You're just getting a blind screen. Let me just pop this off. So if I this is what I'm looking at right now. Dive into the worlds created by Travis Sivart, author, podcaster, storytelling extraordinaire. Boops. Oh look, here we are, fantasy isekai portals. Oh, merch guest appearances. Why is there so much? He gets around. I mean, good for him. I am not super confident in this book so far. It's very confusing. Hey, Bobby, what's up? Welcome. The kid is his name, yes. From the darkness you arrived. Feast upon the daily bread. Glad to have you. Okay, let's go back into this. We're back with Torrance. Torrance crouched in the underbrush, bow held across his bent knee with the quiver of his at his feet. He watched the slave train through the thicket of thorny bushes. The guards were setting up camp for the night, shouting at the chained prisoners to build campfires and other menial tasks. The banner of the staff showed the slaver's mark and the caravan's personnel symbol, a wolf head in a red circle. That was the blood sun wolf slaver then, and memories of stories of their trade floated through Torrance's head. They were known for selling anyone for any purpose and weren't known for their kindness or quality of stock. Though part of him knew that slavery was common since the downfall, he wasn't really on speaking terms with that part of him. Being in his body was like moving into someone else's house moments after they had left. Things were just lying around, waiting to be used, thoughts, memories, and innate skills honed through years of practice. Like he'd heard of the wagons, and before he realized what it was he was doing, he'd hidden in the underbrush. Or, like last night, he'd drawn and knocked an arrow, raised the bow, fired and killed a rabbit before he even knew that he'd moved. Instincts took over, over his reflexes, and just knew what he wanted to do. Slavery wasn't cool, though. Everyone knew that. He'd learned about it in school and heard about it all of his life. Not that he'd ever known, met, or heard of someone who had been a slave during his lifetime, but he did know that his ancestors had been slaves. The bottom line was that you can't own another person. He didn't even like dudes or chicks who were overly possessive of their other half, hanging all over them and blocking other people from talking or hanging out with them. He didn't like bosses that treated employees like crap, and he really didn't like bullies. Torrance somewhere wondered if some of the kids when he was in high school had thought that he had been a bully. He didn't think so, though. He knew that he had picked on a few kids, but they'd practically begged for the attention, and in all the wrong ways. The spazzes and the freaks that liked to talk shit when they should have just shut up. But it wasn't like he beat them up. That would have been ridiculous. Usually, they went away with a cross-armed stare and a little verbal encouragement. And he did have the nerd friend back in the day. He looked out at the kid because he looked out for the kid because he was okay. He didn't shit talk, even though he was smart. After the incident, Torrance had dealt with the other side of the coin on occasion, never directly. No one would ever pick on someone in a wheelchair where others could see, but sometimes he heard the people laughing, or he'd see them notice him as he was approaching a door and they'd let it close even though he was almost to it. People ignored him more than anything, acted like they didn't see him trying to get something off of a high shelf at the grocery store. And the ones that did and helped him often had a look of pity. Torrance didn't know which one bugged him more. Why can't people just chill the chuzz out and be cool, he thought. Treat others decently, without making it feel like some heroic act of kindness. Was it really that hard? Work harder, a harsh voice yelled. We don't want to get caught by the night without a fire set. You dirty little bastards, lazy bastards. Yes, Master Dropsum. The answering voice was snarky and mocking. We wouldn't want to get eaten by any scary monsters, now would we? He uses AI. Grumble, are you for real? I saw this use AI in book marketing and I saw it caught using AI and I thought he was commenting on that. He uses AI and you send me a screenshot. Bro, if he uses AI, it's weird not reading his book. Well, well, what a waste of time then. Looks like we're going up for a different vote, you guys. Hmm. How I use AI without writing? Give me a second. I'm gonna pop this open. Grumble just sent me this. Not a ghostwriter, not a co-writer, not a digital monkey pounding out prose while I sip bourbon. But I do use AI regularly, intentionally, and it's made me better, faster, saner. For feedback, are you joking? This thing cannot. How did they not understand that a freaking computer is not gonna give you the feedback that actually makes sense? Because I'm not here to mass produce content. Bro, your first thing up here said, "This is how I get stuff out faster." Could I crank out 10 AI written books a month? Probably, but they wouldn't be mine. They'd be puppets dancing in a general direct. He sounds like he's trying to talk out both of his sides of his mouth, but uh-uh. No. No, this is him saying I use generative AI for this stuff, but I know it's unpopular, so I'm going to try to middle road it. And then when it's cool to just admit to using it, then I'm going to say that I use it. I use AI to speed up the boring parts. Bruh. Well, I get that. I guess that ends that. Gets a 1 star from me, and we get to move on. I will put up a new vote after this, and we'll start a different book next week. So he copies it. Yeah, yeah. And it's all lazy, and it's not even just on the lazy bit, it's not even just on the theft bit and the morality bit, it's the cost of it, it's literally the people who created these things wanting to destroy humanity, they have said it themselves, and the fact that the places that they are going are destroying the environment, are costing the people to subsidize this garbage that nobody wants, there's, like, no upside to any of this, and the only people that use these are lazy people. And then you got smug people talking out both sides of their mouths like that. I'm sorry we wasted our time. At least we know why this book is freaking nonsense. Let me go see if I can still return it. That's where we'll end this, and then I'll put up a new vote. Sorry, guys. What a downer. Someday it's going to turn into I'm only going to be reading stuff from people I've interacted with and can trust enough to not not be dopes. Oh, my return window on this closed on the 16th. Dang. Nope, it closed 11 days ago. Boo. It's okay. I'll just 1 star it. That's where it'll go. Just got in sentencing this book to literary death. We are tried to read. The book is nonsense. Makes sense why it's unreadable after discovering the author writer uses generative AI and brags about it. Yucky. Sorry I wasted time. Not just my time, but the time of my book club. Loin drinking game. Well, have a good night, everybody. There will be a new vote up in just a couple of hours. I'll have it up at midnight. I gotta go fish through things. At least there was, at least the comeback had drama. I can say that. Good night, everybody. Have a good weekend. See you for The Witcher and enjoy your casserole. Bobby, don't die.